So our goal is, as human performance technologists, we're engineers. And people come to us with a problem. What's an engineer do? They take a very systematic, systemic, scientific approach, very disciplined approach to fix a problem, to solve and fix a problem. And unlike a scientist, what happens when a scientist is doing their study and they're doing research, when they run out of money, they stop. They're done with their research. We can't do that. We have to continue going until we find the right solution. Therefore, we have to be very effective and efficient in how we approach things. That's why it's important for us to be principle-based, principle-driven.
Hello and welcome to the ERP Organizational Change Journal podcast, brought to you by Nestell & Associates. Nestell & Associates is an ERP organizational change management firm serving the private equity industry. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Donald, the founder of Invert Ventures, a change strategy firm, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Jack Nestell, the founder of Nestell & Associates, and the host of the ERP Organizational Change Journal podcast. The ERP Organizational Change Journal seeks to share expertise, insight, and create effective conversation to help guide ERP organizational change to real, measurable, and verified success, expanding what we can see so we can act in a more effective way. We seek to promote, connect, and foster relationships in the ERP organizational change community. The primary purpose of this podcast is to discuss, share, and reflect upon effective and efficient ways in which to realize ERP organizational change success. We will discuss the people, process, and technological components of ERP organizational change. This podcast is intended as a forum to study, share, and discuss ERP organizational change. In this episode, we will discuss learning and development, L&D, and human performance technology, HPT, and its return on investment with Dr. Tim Brock. Dr. Brock is an author, speaker, ROI Institute Senior Consultant, Adjunct Professor, and a former retired Air Force veteran. Dr. Brock has over 30 years of learning and performance improvement, result-based evaluation experience with military, governments, education, healthcare, and corporate organizations around the globe. The ROI Institute is the leading source of return on investment competency building, implementation support, networking, and research. As the Director of Consulting Services, Tim helps organizations implement the ROI Methodology, and he's done this in over 60 countries at more than 5,000 organizations, including the United Nations and the World Bank. During his Air Force career, Tim was responsible for assessing, measuring, and evaluating the effectiveness of the Missile Launch Officer Initial Qualification Training Program for all 5 of USAF's Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Systems, ICBM, weapon systems. While at Lockheed Martin, Tim managed their Science of Learning and Performance team for the global military, education, and healthcare and learning regions, and simulation training solutions. Tim was also the lead human performance system architect to help convert NASA's training from a skill-based model to a competency-based model to help support the next generation of extended deep space exploration missions to the Moon and Mars. Jack, I'm really excited to have Tim on and to discuss human performance technologies and how this relates to business.
Thank you, Jonathan. Likewise. So this week we will continue our discussion around organizational learning and development, and we will further examine effective and efficient L&D, learning and development. So how does an organization know that they are using the right methodology? How do we know, and how do you know as an organization if the development plan is effective? And how do we know that learning and development efforts are realizing a return on investment? Let's ask our guest. Tim, thank you for being on our show today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
So, Tim, let's go ahead and get started. Let's dive right in. And my first question for you is, there's this idea of learning and development, but of course, there's effective and efficient learning and development. What would that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when we talk about effective and efficient learning and development, we're talking about value, and value lies in the eyes of the beholder. And I like to think of this question not what it means to me, but what does it mean to the executives who are paying for it? And for the stakeholders who are affected by it, since we're taking their people off the job for it. When you look at it from the executive's perspective, they want to see improved organizational performance measure that we typically call, key performance indicators that deal with quality, cost, time, outputs, things like that. And effective learning and development programs should be improving or sustaining those KPI measures. Now, for the stakeholders, like managers, what do they want to see? Well, they want to see improved workplace performance that they report to the executives in the reports that are used to measure how effective they are in managing and leading their teams. So effective learning and development programs should also improve workplace performance. Now, by efficient, what do we mean? Well, efficient is where we expect the learning and development costs to improve those operational organizational measures, but we want them to be less than the monetary benefits of the effective learning and development program. So we want the benefits to exceed the costs because we know that enterprise resources are scarce and we want to be good stewards of those funds.
Tim, thank you for that answer. I always love getting definitions from experts. And I feel like you are an expert in ROI, and especially when it comes to the learning and development world. So building on that question, can you share with our listeners, how does learning and development relate to ROI? And what is your methodology and way of both measuring it and explaining it to stakeholders, as you mentioned, value in their own terms?
Sure. The ROI methodology, it's a comprehensive and balanced measurement and evaluation process that generates 6 types of measures that allow us to answer 3 basic questions. Was the learning and development program effective? Was it efficient? And that third one, which is really important, how do you know? So this methodology, the ROI methodology, allows us to evaluate a learning and development program at different levels, that are related to the different stakeholders out there. And it's depending upon why you're evaluating the program. See, you don't have to go to ROI for every program. You want to be able to measure what's appropriate. For some programs, you just maybe want to measure, how did people respond to the course and did they learn what was necessary? For another program, you might want to look at, well, did it transfer to the workplace? And then other ones that might be really important, part of the strategic objective that you have, the executives might want to say, no, we want to know the impact that this learning and development program had on the organization, and was it a worthwhile investment? What was the ROI? So this methodology allows you to evaluate programs all the way from a very basic to how did they react to it, all the way up to the impact and the ROI of the program. So what makes the ROI methodology even more unique is it includes a process step to isolate the effect of the learning and development program to improve a KPI to answer the question, how do you know the improved KPI you claim your learning and development program improved is actually the result of your learning and development program and not something else? So this is a credibility issue so that we're making sure that we only take credit for the improvements that our learning and development program contributed to improving that performance measure and giving credit to others out there that they may have had in improving those measures. So, and we also want to have the evidence to back that up. So that's what this ROI methodology allows us to do, dealing with the effectiveness and efficiencies of the learning and development programs, improving it, proving the value that it brings to the organization.
Such great insight, Tim. Thank you. And, you'd mentioned 2 ideas that I think sometimes are perhaps lost in some L&D programs, and that is how well does that learning transfer to the workplace? And then ultimately, as you mentioned, how does it actually improve the organization, through meaningful KPIs? So great insight. You have an impressive career and record, Tim. What drives your passion for effective and efficient L&D practice? Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from a long time ago. Back in my enlisted days in the Air Force, I learned an expression, and that is never confuse activity with productivity. And as I moved up the ranks in organizations in the military and outside the military, I began to see why learning development is typically the first budget cut when things get tight. You know, Richard Swanson, who's a pioneer in human performance technology, he wrote that unless performance improvement expenditures, which learning and development is a part of, unless it contributes to the viability and the profitability of an organization, you can expect to see those expenditures be cut. So, I think we all understand that executives pay for results, not activities. And this is when I discovered human performance technology, and it became a means to this end to focus on results and not activities, which is really what we're being funded to generate.
So, Tim, I'm curious here, based on that question, how do you define human performance technology, HPT, for our listeners? Because I know that's they may have different views of what that actually means. And then I'm curious, what's the relationship between human performance technologies and L&D, learning and development, in most organizations based on your experience?
Well, that's a great question, because when you think about it, what's the purpose of learning and development? It's to improve human performance, to improve organizational performance. So human performance technology, as I mentioned earlier, is the means to that end. What we do in human performance technology is we're supposed to be about leading organizations by applying systematic and systemic thinking and reflection to improve worthy performance. And by worthy performance, what I mean is the learning and development effort to produce effective and efficient solutions, or that it's a worthwhile investment. So human performance technology is about engineering worthy performance, where the value of the results exceed the costs of the behaviors that we have to change to get there.
Tim, worthy in whose eyes?
Worthy in the eyes of the various stakeholders. So remember I said the value is in the eye of the beholder? So what we defined is, what do they consider worthy? So it could be an intangible, or it could be something intangible. So the executives typically work in the tangible areas where they like to see, a price tag on something, a monetary value to it, because that's one of their scorecards that they have up there. But for some people out there, if it improves employee engagement, that could be good enough for them. Or it improves people's coming to work on time. You don't necessarily have to put a dollar figure on that, but if you can say that that's a positive outcome that we achieved in changing performance, so that, we figure that it's a worthwhile investment because people are now coming to work on time now, which in our own mind, we go, that's going to be saving us money because people are being more productive. So what we do in human performance technology is we focus on the human dimension of individual and team dynamics so that we can improve their operational and organizational performance using a systemic and systematic and scientific methodology. And that's what we're talking about. When we talk about technology, we're not talking about shiny objects and tools. We're talking about a systematic, disciplined methodology. Yeah. So this is what we're trying to do with learning and development, is we're supposed to be about delivering value to the organization to justify continued funding. Because we know people are out there fighting for those dollars, those scarce dollars and resources that are being allocated to L&D. And we have to justify that we deserve to have that continued funding versus other programs and projects that they have out there that are competing for those same dollars.
Tim, that's such a great explanation, on that relationship between HPT and L&D. Very well said. I do want to share with our listeners, Tim, this is an idea that you discussed in some of your work, but would really like you to share more with our listeners. We're talking about HPT and human performance technology, but what would you say is the founding quote unquote charter of HPT, and as you describe and discuss that in some of your work?
Sure, happy to. When I think about our charter, I go back to one of our founders of human performance technology, Thomas Gilbert. And he defined what I believe the charter of HPT in this seminal book titled Human Competence, Engineering Worthy Performance. So Gilbert stated that the aim of performance engineering is fundamentally economic. That's when he talks about worthy performance. We're engineering worthy performance. He believed that HPT's central focus is valued accomplishments. Now remember, we said value is in the eye of the beholder, but we also want to make sure that those valued accomplishments are verifiable results and that they exceed the cost to achieve them. So therefore, valued accomplishments and worthy performance are effective and efficient.
Mm-hmm.
They're effective and efficient results. So to me, the charter of HPT is to engineer worthy performance. And when you think about engineers, they engineer using a systematic, systemic scientific methodology to efficiently solve problems. And they got to solve problems in budget.
Exactly. So, Tim, I want to elaborate on your response there. And you wrote a three-part article that Jonathan and I wanted to share with our listeners as well. But part one was from June 2nd, 2020, and we'll put this in the show notes, of course, the state of an engineering worthy performance and the 10 standards, part one. But in this article, you stated that, and I would like to share a couple of sentences here, but you stated, quote, has performance technology, HPT, strayed from its charter or stayed true to it? This three-part article will offer an argument that we have and offer a map to navigate back to our founding charter. This article will review the HPT charter that Gilbert established for our profession to establish a shared understanding of our charter and review Gilbert's eclectic paradox warning and why it matters. This article sets the stage for the two articles that will follow, end quote. Tim, why is the original charter important? And now that you kind of defined that or explained that a bit in a previous question, but why is it important and what is the eclectic paradox warning exactly?
Yeah. In the article I talked about, are we straying from, that charter? Because it's been my observation that too many people who claim to be doing the work of an HPT or learning and development have been, to put it in a common vernacular, been seduced by the dark side. And they've fallen into what we call the activity trap. Remember I said earlier, never confuse activity with productivity?
Right.
Well, they've fallen into that activity trap where they're busy creating programs without applying the first standard of human performance technology, which is to focus on outcomes and results. And that's absolutely critical. We are about engineering worthy performance, not creating activities and things that keep people busy and ways to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the eclectic paradox is the HPT approach that integrates principles and practices from many disciplines that we weave into some type of a learning and development solution. We might be pulling something from, dealing with Six Sigma, or we might be pulling something in dealing with motivation theory or economic theory or different things, group dynamics. I mean, we pull a lot of different things together because we're dealing with human beings and teams. Right. Very dynamic dimension that we have. And within an organization, you got a lot of organizational issues that you're trying to deal with also because you're talking about taking a systemic perspective. And what we propose is when you're looking at an issue out there from a systemic perspective, you want to look at the work itself, you want to look at the worker, you want to look at the workplace, and you want to look at the world, and that is within the organization, the environment that it works within and how it interrelates with the market. So we want to be looking at all of those different variables out there, and this can create a very jumbled mess of eclectic ideas that lack focus. So this eclectic smorgasbord, if you will, of different possibilities, produces some really elegant learning and development programs, and they're using the latest fads and canards and shiny technology out there, but they don't solve the problem or the opportunity they were funded to solve. And I'm reminded of a quote from Sir Winston Churchill that I really like, who said that, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results.
Nice quote.
Tim, I love this discussion, right? The question of, is HPT or learning development seduced by the activity trap? I'm going to reference for our listeners, you're citing Roger Kaufman, who wrote a short, thought-provoking article titled HPT and PI at the Crossroads in 2019, in which, you quote, he made 2 points. One was that everyone seems to be jumping on the performance improvement bandwagon, to help people work faster, cheaper, and better. The danger, Kaufman asserts, is a focus on individuals doing their jobs right rather than on doing the right jobs. Now, further on, and we're not going to quote this directly for our listeners, you have what I find an incredible analogy about the Titanic, where HPT is now arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic because it's easier, faster, and makes people's lives easier. But you're still aiming in iceberg waters. Can you explain this to our listeners? And what I'm really curious about is both how does it look like from an activity point of view and a justification from within HPT and L&D? And how does it look in relation to how organizations value their learning and development resources as a consequence of this activity trap?
Yeah, his using of the Titanic example I thought was really good, because when you think about it, while the Titanic crew was doing a great job of getting those deck chairs lined up, and they were focused on their jobs and they were doing it well, they forgot to look at the answer of why they were on the ship in the first place, and that was to get from one side of the Atlantic to the other. All they had to do was turn around, and they would have had a better opportunity to sight some icebergs that would have helped them to have a successful voyage to New York where they were heading. So a lot of times what we do in learning and development and within organizations is we fail to step back and take a systemic perspective of looking at where are we going as an organization, and are we having the people do the right jobs to help us to achieve that. So we want to make sure that we align the what they are doing with why they are doing with our learning and development efforts. There are, and I've seen this over and over, there are a lot of programs, learning and development programs out there that have been in existence for years, but they were put in existence for an organization that no longer exists. It's no longer helping the organization to achieve what it's going to. And one of the things you can do through proper analysis and evaluation of the programs, using the ROI methodology for one of them, is, okay, why was the program implemented in the first place? What needs was it trying to address? What do we want people in the workplace doing to achieve, to improve those KPIs? And what do they have to learn to do those, and how can we deliver the program in the way they like it? What objectives do we want them to achieve for the program? And how well are we doing that? And is it getting us where we want to get? And the executives can sit back and go, well, that's no longer a need. We no longer have to pursue that. We've changed, which gives you a justification to determine, okay, should we continue this program? Should we modify it? Or should we just, let it die a death on its own? Or should we terminate it? Because again, scarce resources are, being fought for in organizations, and executives have to make that hard choice of where do we allocate those resources to optimize, the efficiencies of our organization to drive the business to achieve our organizational goals and objectives.
Great insight. Very well said. Tim, I do want to ask you a question that you actually ask in your article, and I really want to share the question and the answer with our listeners. But what does it mean to be principle-driven, and why is HPT principle-driven, would you say? Or is it?
It is. Yeah, it is. This takes us back to Gilbert. As HPTs, I already mentioned that what we do is eclectic. We can't rely on one model or theory that will fit every situation. If you only have one model or theory, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're trying to pound a square peg in around a hole because you don't have any other options. So we, in the world of human performance technology, have applied these, what we call 10 standards. The first 4 are principles that we apply when we're using our 6 process steps. And the 4 principal standards are what guide our thinking to ensure that we focus on outcomes and results, that we take a systemic perspective in what we're doing, that we are adding value to the organization, and we're partnering with the various stakeholders out there so we can define value through their eyes to achieve the results that they want to achieve. And we're also solution neutral. We don't come in with a solution already in mind. We go, hey, look, we found a problem, and we just happen to have the solution for it. And that's why we're eclectic, because, we take this inquiring approach out there, a scientific approach, a heuristic approach, where we're saying, what does the data tell us? And then from that, using our principles, we go out and find, okay, what is the best way that we can go about trying to solve what we like to say, these wicked problems that we have out there. It's really not an easy solution. Now, I'm not talking about evil when I talk about wicked, but I'm talking about complex, right? Mm-hmm. Don't let anybody get the wrong idea.
Exactly. Tim, you can't see me, but I say this generally on some of our podcasts. At a certain point, I've got a goofy smile on my face because wicked problems is right where I live. So let's dive into this. I get a sense from you and your article that HPT sees itself as a multidisciplinary space where by its very nature, when dealing with human beings, you pull from great ideas wherever you may find them. And as you're mentioning, that creates a paradox. Yes. So what Jack asked you about the principles, what does it mean to be principle driven? I want to ask you, how do those principles help the HPT profession, both in figuring out who it is or what it is with all of these interdisciplinary tools, and then how it sells and supports organizations to be more effective in those wicked environments?
Yeah, great question. I'm a believer that the principles and practices that we have in HPT are our identity. And this goes back to Gilbert. He said that the principles help us make sense and organize all these eclectic ideas together, because we want to be doing three things, okay, with these principles. The principles help us to keep focused on the real world, to help people solve a range of broad and complex problems. That's what they're looking for us to do. They're not looking for a program, they're looking for solutions. And they help us to keep things simple, to avoid confusing noise and avoidable costs. There's a lot of great programs and different products out there that you can get that really are shiny and they're beautiful and all that. But, we're bombarded every day with all these products and different things. And it just creates a lot of noise. And they're not free, because it keeps adding on costs. So Gilbert, what he talked about is we want to avoid baggage, excessive baggage, to keep things simple, but so we can achieve the end. And the final thing that these principles help us to do is help us to fit different perspectives together. So let's look at this thing from a quality perspective. Look at this thing from an economic theory perspective. Let's have us look at this from a cost-cutting perspective, whatever, so that we can weave these things together into an elegant and coherent unity that makes sense to everybody. So we want to engage all the various stakeholders because we're dealing with organizational problems. So we should be engaging all the stakeholders that are, have a stake in this to tap their expertise to have an organizational solution, and learning development plays a specific role in that. And that is that, we give people the knowledge and skills necessary for them to do their current job or to prepare them for future jobs. But they have a role as well.
That's so well said. And, this idea that the HPT and the L&D profession in general, to me, is really like what we do at Nestell & Associates, which is ERP organizational change. And there's not only lots of room for improvement in our field in the sense of learning from the professions of others, right? So, for instance, I think in the ERP organizational field, L&D, you and your profession have a lot to offer us, and there's lots of room for improvement. But it's very much a multidisciplinary practice, and there's a lot to learn from other disciplines. And especially when you're talking about, organizations where people are at the heart of the organization, there's a lot there, right? That goes way beyond project management tactics, for instance. So well said.
Yeah. And when you're talking about people, we're talking about every level of the organization, because even in the executives, they're people too, and they have to develop their capabilities to do their jobs better, to be able to perform in the position that they're in, but also they're grooming themselves for future jobs out there. We're talking about talent development, that pool of leadership. So it's a very complex situation when you're dealing with the human dimension within the entire organization. And then particularly when you're dealing with international organizations, you got situations with different cultures, You got different languages. I mean, it really is quite a challenging and wicked problem that we're facing.
Tim, isn't that where principles come in, right? Principles founded in what I would say are sound, objective observation, maybe. But by that, I mean, when you have a practice that's founded in principle, that can be applied across organizations or cultures or different contexts with the same, I guess, advantage, right?
Absolutely. For example, like for our first principle we have to focus on outcomes and results, those results could be different in different countries, in different organizations, or even different departments within an organization. The other thing, too, is taking a systemic view. We're taking a look at the work, the workplace, the workers, and the world. Those are all different depending upon where they are in the organization or where they are in the world. So we don't come in with a preconceived notion. We come in there with our minds wide open and say, where does the data take us? And the only way we're going to find that out is by talking to the stakeholders. And that's why, we have a principle that says you got to partner with the stakeholders and you got to make sure you're adding value as they perceive value.
Yeah.
Yep. Right.
Tim, I want to highlight this for our listeners because this is I find this to be such a refreshing concept in that it sounds like you're meeting people where they are in the organization and you're leading with this simple but profound question, in my view, is what do you find valuable and how is it meaningful to you? And those two things, it's amazing what I think you can do with those two things.
Yeah, and the thing is that we help organizations tap the resources that they already have. One of the things that used to frustrate me when I was working with large international organizations is, I don't know why it is that in some organizations, they think you're the top talent out there and they really want you to work for them. And then as soon as they hire you, they don't listen to you anymore. They think, well, you can't be that smart. You work for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they go out and they bring out an external consultant to come in and, we give them solutions. We say, we should do this and we should do that. And then the external consultants come in and they do their thing and they come back and they basically just reinforce everything that the people inside were saying to do. Now, external consultants have an important role because they can facilitate that. They can bring expertise they have in working with other organizations to help to optimize the leverage of the insights and the knowledge they get from their workforce and bring new insights. But the whole idea is what can we do to help an organization to optimize its performance, help optimize human performance to optimize organizational performance by leveraging the resources that we have available within the organization and then tapping external resources that we can bring in as necessary. Because if it's not valued by the stakeholders within the organization, they don't care what outsiders think.
Tim, you mentioned Gilbert a few times, and we'll certainly have a reference to some of Gilbert's work as well. But I'd like to take a minute to share more with our listeners from your articles, and specifically what are known as Gilbert's theorems of engineering-worthy performance. Mm-hmm. And in your paper, you state that, quote, it is common to read that Gilbert had 3 theorems. It seems he had 1 core theorem and 3 corollary theorems, end quote. Mm-hmm. And these are A, the core theorem was human competence is a function of worthy performance. B, the first economic corollary is worth reflects the ratio between accomplishment, value, and cost. Mm-hmm. C, the second economic corollary is measuring accomplishments precedes measuring behaviors. And lastly, D, the third economic corollary is valued performance as a result of behavior and environment. Tim, based on this, what was the conclusion of this particular paper?
Well, my thought on that with what we're talking about here is you'll notice that in each of the theorems that it supports the engineering of worthy performance. Gilbert's core theorem is human performance is considered competent if it's considered worthy. In other words, the benefits outweigh the cost to achieve them. How could you call someone competent doing their work if, what they produce is worth less than it costs them to do it? So It goes back to the economics. And his supporting theorems focus on this, how worth is established. He talks about accomplishment. He talks about value. Again, value is perceived by the beholder and the cost involved. He also talks about how the focus should be on the accomplishments, the results, and not the behaviors, which are costs. You don't measure behaviors first. you measure the results, the KPIs, because you don't know what behaviors are necessary to achieve those KPIs or what has to change. And then the other one, he says that the organizational environment plays a critical role in achieving the desired behaviors and performance. So we can't ignore the organizational support issues. Gary Rummer, who was contemporary of Gilberts, matter of fact, they worked together at the same organization called Praxis, and Rummer's made a statement where he said that if you pit a good person against the bad system wins every time. So we can be doing everything right in learning and development and giving them the necessary knowledge and skills that is required for them to do it, and done a great job with our analysis. But if the organization doesn't support them when they get back on the job or support them when they're applying on the job, you're going to fail. This is why a lot of times, research out there says that anywhere from 60 to 90% of learning and development programs fail to transfer to the job.
Tim, I find this fantastic, and I want to follow up on this. So in your article, you talk about critical levels and multiple levels of effective and efficient learning, change, and performance. And I want to just give our listeners a way of understanding what you mean. So I'm going to run through them now. But level 0 is input. Level 1 is reaction. Level 2 is learning. Level 3 is application. And level 4 is impact. And can you briefly provide some insight into these stages and to link them to how we can actually make learning and development effective so that we move from that 70 or 80% of programs not serving the end results or creating them end results? How does this methodology help us do that?
Well, yeah, the ROI methodology is based upon an advanced logic model. We know the typical logic model where you have your inputs, your activities, your outputs, and your outcomes and results. And what the ROI methodology done is added a piece in front of that, because if you're going to evaluate the outcomes and results, what are you going to be evaluating against? You got to have a baseline. So what the ROI methodology has done is it takes into place the needs assessment. In the needs assessment, it starts off with the first step of asking a very simple question. Okay, start with why. Is there a problem out there we want to do? Okay. If we're going to be creating a program out there, what problem are we trying to solve? Why does it exist? So we start off by asking, is there a problem or an opportunity out there that's worth solving? Is there something that we want to take action on? And if so, how do we know it's a problem? What are the key performance indicators that we're looking at that tells us that there's a problem or there's an opportunity here for us to solve? Now, once we define that we got those key performance indicators, then that we got to look at is we got to see, well, what's happening in the workplace? What do people need to start doing, stop doing, or doing differently in the workplace so that we can change their workplace behaviors to improve those key performance indicators, those business measures? And it can be involved with they lack the knowledge and skills to do something. It could be a new process needs to be put in place, maybe new incentive system. It could be a lot of different things. Maybe we got to change the work. Maybe we got to change some things in the workplace. I mean, we don't know. So we do that analysis out there to figure out, okay, what's causing these deficient workplace behaviors so that we can improve those key performance indicators that the business is paying attention to, those results. Then we got to ask the question, if we change something, if we change the process, if we change the procedure, people got to learn about it and how it affects them. So they got to learn, okay, what am I expected to do differently on the job as a result of this? And then, of course, we want to design the program in a way that people go, hey, this is a great idea. I think it's good. I'm going to do this. This is going to help me to do my job because it's relevant, it's useful, it's new information, and I'm going to do this. Versus them saying, no, this is a dumb idea, another flavor of the month coming down from the executives, it'll never work. So the idea is that we want to make sure that we align what we're doing with defining what our root causes and what has to change in the workplace, and what the learning and development program has to be about and how it's designed, so it's all aligned to improve those key performance indicators, those business measures, to achieve the payoff that the executives say that this is worthwhile pursuing. And then what we do is we write objectives, program objectives for each level of how we define success. How will we define what's good enough for their end of course evaluations? What would we like to see? Well, maybe if we say, if we get an average 4.0 on a 5-point Likert scale, we'll consider that good enough. Okay, great. How about learning? Well, we want them to be able to do this, to be able to demonstrate that they can do this with 90% proficiency. Okay, great. So we're going to measure them in the learning development program that they can do it to that level. What do you want to see them doing on the job? Well, we want to see them applying this on the job. Well, how are we going to determine that? Well, we want to see them doing this, and this on the job. And we'd like to see them doing it within the next 6 months. Okay, great. Okay, so what else do we want to see? Well, we'd like to see those key performance indicators improve by 20% in 6 months. Great. Okay, and what kind of an ROI would you like to see? They say, I think we'd be happy with a 20% ROI. Great. So now we've got objectives. We know how we have to design a learning and development program and then the other solutions that we need to put in place to improve those key performance indicators. And then we're going to evaluate how well did the program do to meet those needs-driven objectives. And then we just work our way up.
Thanks, Tim. That's a great, insightful response. And now what I'd like to do is to share with our listeners, it's actually, I believe it's part 4. It's the conclusion in your part 4 of the series you did, again, which is the state of engineering, worthy performance, and the 10 standards. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to quote, and I'm going to share about 4 or 5 sentences or so here, I think, and then I want to get your thoughts. But you said, quote, Gilbert set the stage for the HPT profession by classifying what HPT practitioners do when engineering worthy performance. Gilbert was careful to build on his 3 principles and frame them within his leisurely theorems. This article nibbles around the edges of Gilbert's genius without touching his argument that most of what we do to manage behavior produces incompetence. Pretty powerful there, Tim. And you continue to say the field of performance improvement has grown beyond the original fields of behaviorism, instructional design. These professionals were early adopters of Gilbert's work as well as the work of other pioneers within our profession. HPT professionals have matured Gilbert's 3-edged ruler principles, which are integrated into ISPI's 10 standards of performance improvement. You then go on to ask a question. Has the HPT profession moved beyond Gilbert's valued and worthy performance as well? Not if the HPT practitioner is truly applying ISPI's 10 standards. ISPI begins and ends with its 10 standards with results. The HPT practitioner does this by thinking like an engineer rather than a scientist to engineer valued and worthy performance, end quote. I really like that, Tim. I like that paragraph. But can you share additional thoughts with our listeners?
Yeah, because when you think about it, when people come to us, when executives and managers and leaders come to us, they usually come to us with a solution in mind to fix a problem. They come and say, my people need training. Well, they really even don't know what the problem is. They're looking for help. It's kind of like, think about watching a foreign film, and they come to you and you see their lips moving and they say, my people need training. I want you to look underneath them and see the words, we're here to help make the pain go away. The idea of what we do as human performance technologists within the learning and development profession, but we should be looking at it from a human performance technology perspective, is that the executives are wanting us to somehow influence those key performance indicators. They're not looking for an activity. Something got their attention. Some measure got their attention that is either underperforming or they say we can do better. That's what they're looking for us to help them improve. Maybe training is part of the solution. Maybe it's not. But anytime you change something in the organization, learning is going to be a part of it because people got to learn what changed and how it affects them. So our goal is, as human performance technologists, we're engineers. If people come to us with a problem, what's an engineer do? They take a very systematic, systemic, scientific approach, very disciplined approach to fix a problem, to solve and fix a problem. And unlike a scientist, what happens when a scientist is doing their study, they're doing research, when they run out of money, they stop. They're done with their research. We can't do that. We have to continue going until we find the right solution. Therefore, we have to be very effective and efficient in how we approach things. That's why it's important for us to be principle-based, principle-driven, so that we can sit back and be very eclectic. One of my favorite articles written on metacognition. And metacognition is about thinking how you think, by an individual by the name of Schoenfield. And his article that he wrote was, "What's all the fuss about metacognition?" And he was a mathematician, and he would teach mathematics classes at the university level, and you got the best and brightest high school students coming in, and they're taking these math classes. And one of the things that he noticed is they weren't doing well, and he tried to figure out why are they not doing well in the classes when they excelled in high school. And what he discovered was, they'd get a problem, and they would take that problem and they would keep pounding that problem, trying to solve the problem with that formula that they were using. Kind of like the square peg in the round hole illustration I used earlier.
Right.
So what he decided to do is he said, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to see how actual mathematicians solve these problems, because what was happening was a lot of students were dropping out of the mathematics major and going into other disciplines, so they were not having, mathematicians graduating. So he said, well, how do mathematicians think? And what he did was he looked at mathematicians and had them think out loud. What they were doing is they would take a problem and they would get a formula and they would start working with it a little bit. And if it wasn't getting them where they wanted to do, they would back off and they would try a different approach. And they would keep probing and trying different approaches until they got to where they wanted to get to solve the problem. And that's what the principles allow us to do at HPT. This is what we should be doing. We can't come in with a solution in mind or a solution that we're always comfortable with using all the time. What we should be doing when we're applying the principles and looking at the right solutions is we should be probing, like what Schoenfield said mathematicians do. Let's try this approach. Just look at it from this perspective. Let's look at it this way. Let's try this. Does this get us where we're trying to get to? And where are we trying to get to? We're trying to get to improving the key performance indicators, the results that matter to the stakeholders that they value.
Yeah.
So that's what the principles do for us. It allows us to sit back and to manage our thinking, to probe, and to really be reflective. One of the things I said earlier about what we do as performance improvement is that we're about what? We're about leading an organization by applying a systemic thinking and reflection to improve worthy performance. So we should be about thinking and reflection, not just following a formula and going through.
That's fantastic insight.
Tim, I really like that answer, and I want to give us an opportunity on this call to take it down to a little more practical of a level. I saw an article by you on performance analytics titled "The Missing Big Data Link Between Learning Analytics and Business Analytics." And this is a deep interest area of mine. So I'm curious, from a HPT and a learning and development space, so what are you seeing in this space? What's the gap? And what are people's mindsets and ways of approaching that gap, and how is that limiting the solution space?
Yeah, that's a great point. Interesting. Oxford Economics did a study in 2014, and one of the things that they found out was that 53% of the executives indicate that workforce data is key. It's a key to be a competitive differentiator for them. But yet only 38% of them said that they believe they have ample workforce data to even understand their organization's talents, strengths, and vulnerabilities.
Wow.
So how can you make decisions on where to invest in learning and development to optimize workforce performance to keep you competitive in the workplace and to prepare you for the future? So the best place to find that is by finding out what's actually going on in the workplace. We talked earlier about the 5 levels of evaluation with the ROI methodology. And where we typically have learning analytics is they're looking at, okay, what are they learning? We're looking at their test scores and how well they do here and all that. And then you have your business analytics where they're looking at the business results. So we've got sandwiched in the middle. What we do not know is what's happening in the workplace. So my idea of performance analytics is we need to go out there and we need to find out how can we use big data, business intelligence analytics, technology, to diagnose and remedy and evaluate the level 3 daily practices of the workforce out there to close the professional role competency gap and to inform how we apply our 10 standards of performance improvement to improve organizational performance. And I'm working with an organization right now who's doing that primarily in healthcare, where we're using a 360 instrument to determine, okay, what are the strengths and vulnerabilities of the workforce within healthcare systems. And right now they're working with nurses and they're also working with executives, the leadership out there, because they don't know what's happening on a day-to-day basis out there in the workforce. Who are the strong nurses and who are the weak nurses? You can have two nurses walk through the door. They're both registered nurses, have had the same years of experience. And when one nurse walks in, you go, oh, great. And the other one walks in, you go, oh, great. You know what I mean? You know, one is a really good nurse and the other one is not so hot. Well, how do we identify those nurses out there? So that's what we're in the process of doing, is to identify those nurses so that we can improve those nurses who need the additional help, you know, with their professional development and their skill sets, and then to tap those who are high performers and identify those for potential leadership positions. So what we want to do is be able to tie the analytics, the big data analytics that grows across the board throughout an entire organization, so that a manager could easily press a button and they could take a look at the competencies of individuals, of teams, of shifts, of healthcare departments, of even hospital systems out there, along measures with leadership, communication skills, decision-making, whatever the competencies are that they want to track, to find out, okay, where's the best place for us to invest our talent development, our learning and development dollars that is focused on what the need is rather than taking the sheep dip approach. You all know what the sheep dip approach is? You know, the sheep dip approach is if one sheep has a flea, you dip them all. Well, they may not all have to, right? So the idea is that we want to focus in on giving people what is best for their individualized professional development program. And this performance analytics helps us.
Well, that was a nice article, Tim. And again, we'll be sure to include that in our show notes. But I liked another article of yours as well. And since I really just can't help myself, I want to share that with our listeners too. And
okay.
That article, Tim, was the article you wrote called The Backyard Human Performance Technologist, Applying the Development Research Methodology to Develop and Validate a New Instructional Design Framework. And in that, you said, quote, Development Research Methodology, or DRM, has been recommended as a viable research approach to expand the practice to theory / theory to practice literature that human performance technology, HPT, practitioners can integrate into the day-to-day workflow that they already use to develop instructional products. However, little has been written about how it can be applied in a workplace setting to allow HPT practitioners to consider this research approach for adoption into their own activities. And then you go on to say, Tim, the result of this case indicates that this research methodology provides a viable approach that HPT practitioners can integrate to their current practices to provide a practice-based research baseline to contribute to the practice to theory / theory to practice literature. Can you tell me more?
Sure. Yeah, what this came about was when I was working at Lockheed Martin, and I was the person that was in charge of, for the proposal they were doing for designing the training solution that we would be using for astronauts and different individuals within the space team for returning astronauts for deep space long duration missions to the moon and onto Mars. And of course, when you're dealing with a proposal, you're under the gun to get things done real quick. And as I was looking at how we would go about doing this, because we have never done anything like this before, how do you train people, astronauts, for these types of missions? You know, at that point, we were at the low Earth short duration missions. I was read an article by a former director of training at NASA who said that NASA needed to go from a skills-based to a competency-based approach for doing these types of things. So I said, okay, well, how am I going to go about doing that? Well, you know, Lockheed wasn't going to let me go out and do any basic research on it, and applied research was really an appropriate approach because, you know, we had to get things done. So as I was developing the solution going along, I was practicing the principles of developmental research because it's one of the tiers that's considered to accept a scholarship. It's called scholarship of application. We can learn from what we're doing out there in our day-to-day practices. So I used the HPT standards and process when I went about doing this. And it allowed me to do it because I said earlier that the HPT methodology, the process it has, is systematic, and it's systemic, and it's scientifically based. So it dovetails perfectly to allow me to take a scientific applied research approach while doing developmental research of creating this solution to a real world problem. In this situation, it's a real world problem for another world problem.
Yeah, right.
I really love that description of your experience in action, what I call action research. So, Tim, here on the podcast, we love to learn from fellow practitioners, colleagues, friends, people, boots on the ground, as well as researchers. And so this is my favorite, maybe tied for my favorite question to ask all of our guests. Uh-huh. In summary of this conversation, if you were going to distill down your work and your experience and your way of being into, 3 or 4 sentences, what would you say to ERP organizational change practitioners? What would you advise them? And what would you tell them to do? What would you tell them to see or watch out for? And what would you tell them to be?
Okay. I would tell them to be like bacon. Make everything better.
That's great.
My thought was, when you're talking about enterprise resource planning, you got to look at the big picture. You got to take an organizational perspective, regardless of where you are in the organization, and understanding what is valued by the organization, what is valued by the executives. Why should they value what you're doing? We've got to be able to see and show the value of our programs. And the value is defined in the eyes of the beholder. So my point to practitioners out there is understand what your role is in the organization. And like Jeff Bezos says out there with his organization, he says, if you can't show how you're adding value to the organization, you're not. So we got to show how we're adding value to organization. One of the best ways that I know to do that is through the ROI methodology of evaluating programs to show the value, the impact, and the ROI or whatever level that is appropriate for that program, but also to apply the principles and practice of human performance technology to take a systematic, and scientific perspective of finding those issues out there that are important to the executives and solving those problems. I used to tell my cadets when I was with ROTC instructor, they were going on to be young, lieutenants in the Air Force. I would tell them, I said, what you want to do to make a difference is go to your commander, find out what's important to your commander, find out what's causing him or her problems, and help them solve that problem. I said, I'm not talking about brown nosing. I'm talking about showing that you're value added because, number one, they're going to appreciate you being on their side and they're going to remember you. I said, plus the other thing is you're learning how to think and behave like they are. And I said, that's going to take you very far because it's a different perspective than, you're sitting in your cubicle someplace and you're just fitting in with your narrow bandwidth. If you want to grow within an organization, you need to learn how the organization operates and be known as someone that people can go to help solve organizational problems.
Tim, I think that's a phenomenal answer.
Yeah. Tim, we truly appreciate your expertise, experience, and insight. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We really appreciated your time with us today. Be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, and same to you.
Take care, Tim.
All right, I will do.
Listeners, thank you for joining us on today's episode. We are incredibly excited and grateful to have friends, colleagues, and mentors join us on our podcast. We have an incredible lineup of guests, including ERP and organizational change speakers, authors, professors, researchers, pioneers in the field, practitioners, PE partners, business executives, ERP vendors, and organizational stakeholders. Our podcast draws on knowledge from extensive research, collaborative learning, practitioner experience of both project successes and project failures. We hope that you find this podcast useful as we share lessons learned, discover best practices, and explore the human elements and components of ERP organizational change. We invite you to leave us feedback and a review because we want to make this the most useful and insightful podcast you listen to, and we need your help to do so.
Thank you, listeners, for being with us again this week as we seek to, 1, promote, connect, and foster relationships in the ERP organizational change community, 2, contribute to the field of ERP organizational change. And 3, bring research and practice closer together. Please join us again next week as we discuss the latest ERP organizational change research, practice, and stories. Our podcast will draw on knowledge from extensive research, collaborative learning, and practitioner expertise and experience.
From everyone here on the team, Jack and myself, we wish you a great week, and we hope to see you again soon on another episode.
Hashtag the ERP Organizational Change Journal. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.